Hi, my name is Paddy. This is my testimony of God's goodness. Quite a few years ago, I was living on the Gold Coast. My life up to that point had been really difficult because I was born deaf. I was not well at this point in my life because of the high levels of stress and suffering I was experiencing. At this time, I moved to North Queensland, but nothing in my life improved. In fact, everything was worse. I had no friends, no support, no help, and a very limited language to be able to communicate with others. There wasn't another human being that understood me. I was completely isolated and endured a loneliness so deep that my whole body was in a constant state of cry. One day, my soul cried out to God for help. I didn't know God, but I prayed and asked, who is it that created the beautiful trees and animals and the beautiful things in the world? I asked that Creator for help. I asked Him to show me who I was, and I asked if there was a friend out there in this world who would understand me and my life. I asked God to find me a friend. Shortly after my prayer, I had a strangely vivid dream of a person with an indistinguishable face in the dream, but it showed long wavy hair and they were wearing a distinct black jacket. Wherever I went, I looked out for this faceless person with the black jacket that I was drawn to in my dream. 3 years went by and I moved back to the Gold Coast. Back on the Gold Coast, I felt a strong draw to visit a social gathering that the deaf held once a month. I hadn't been there for a long time, but when I walked in, I was drawn like a magnet to a lady sitting at one of the tables. She had long wavy hair and was wearing a black jacket. I sat down opposite her and asked her, "What's your name?" She replied, "Jenny." I asked if she was hearing or deaf. She replied she was only hearing and was just beginning to learn Auslan. We chatted a while. When I got home, I felt so frustrated and had no idea what was going on. Yeah, this was the person in my dream, but they weren't meant to be hearing. With no Auslan, the language that I used, my friend should have been deaf, someone that would understand my culture and my experience. I really didn't understand what was happening. But as it turns out, this was the beginning of our journey together. We met often, and slowly but surely our friendship grew. Our understanding of each other's language and culture grew, and a deep friendship was born. Much later on in our journey, I had another vivid dream. It was linked to the place my grandmother had tried to tell me about when I was 16, but I couldn't understand her because we had no common language. It was a town in northern New South Wales called Murwillumbah. I asked Jenny if she would come with me on this journey to Murwillumbah. So we set off one day in the car, and what we discovered was amazing. Firstly, we visited the museum and looked at lots of photos and books. We discovered that our great-grandparents were both woodcutters from the same area. We visited the land that my grandparents had farmed in the same area that Jenny's great-grandparents had farmed in. It was a journey of discovery. When I arrived home and I had time to think about it, I began to realize the gravity of our paths and the incredible awesomeness of God directing those paths. I spoke with Jenny and pointed out and said, "Did you know we were both born in the same hospital on the Gold Coast? Our great-grandparents were born and came from the same area and are buried in the same graveyard. We had such similarities growing up. We were both tomboys. Our characters were very similar. We shared a common ailment with our backs. We both loved God. And we deeply connected with each other. We both grew up on the Gold Coast, almost side by side. It was strangely comforting to understand that our paths had been so closely paralleled for years. I don't really understand it, but all I know is that years before, when I had prayed that prayer, God had heard me and my prayer came true. God gave me this friend with the same heart as mine. We've helped each other, supported each other, and journeyed together.
Heard 1,000 stories of what they think you're like, but I've heard the tender whisper of love, the dead of night, and you tell me that you're pleased and that I'm never alone. You're a good, good father. It's who you are. It's who you are. It's who you are. And I'm loved by you. It's who I am. It's who I am. It's who I am.
Hi, my name is Jenny, and my story starts when I was 16 years old and I was travelling one day on a public bus. I saw two women signing, and though in my culture it was polite not to stare, I was absolutely fascinated and I couldn't help but stare. That day, a desire to learn sign language was birthed deep within my heart. Life went on, and I didn't really learn Auslan straight away. However, the desire never left me. So when I was 30, I started on a journey of learning Auslan. I inquired with Deaf Services in Brisbane and began a 6 weeks course that taught me the basics, the alphabet and a few beginner signs like my name is and where do you live. They suggested going to the Deaf Social Club so that I could continue to sign and improve my Auslan skills. So off I went one evening to the Deaf Club where they hold a social gathering. I have to say I felt extremely uncomfortable not being able to communicate very well at all with the 30 deaf people there that were extremely engaged in conversation. I couldn't communicate with them well, and my signing was so extremely slow that it was embarrassing. A few of the deaf there tried to communicate a little with me, but many were just engaged in their own conversations, and it was all so foreign to me. I felt really stuck that first night, and I thought when I left that I wouldn't return again. It just all seemed too difficult at the time. However, a month went by, and I felt determined to try at least one more time. So off I went again. I was sitting at the table, and I noticed a lady walk in that I hadn't seen there the month prior. It was a little strange, as she seemed to be looking at me and heading straight for me. She walked towards me and sat opposite me and asked me, "What's your name?" I replied, "Jenny." She asked if I was hearing or deaf, and I explained I was hearing and that I was only beginning to learn Auslan. That night she was so beautifully patient with me, teaching me a few signs and trying to communicate with me, and it eased that discomfort that I felt. I felt relieved that there was somebody that was so patient and willing to talk to me. I was happy and thankful that I began to learn a few new signs in their language. After a few times of meeting at the Deaf Social Club, Patty and I began to meet for coffee on Saturdays. We would spend hours and hours trying to communicate with each other. It was incredibly hard work for both of us to try and learn each other's language and bridge the gap of communication. Weeks turned into months, and months turned into years. And slowly but surely, we began to learn about each other's lives, each other's culture, and in the process, we grew in the knowledge of each other's language. For quite a few years, I was unaware that Patty had dreamed of our meeting one another, or that she had prayed and cried out to God for a friend. When she told me, though, it made so much sense. We had by this time become as close as sisters, bound by a deep friendship that had pushed through the boundaries that perhaps others might have considered too difficult. We shared the same determination. It's taken time, it's taken love, it's taken commitment, it's taken patience, and it's taken endurance. But we never gave up struggling through, building our bridge brick by brick until we could walk over that bridge. Our paths were always predestined to meet. God always knew it, and our sovereign God had planned it. He knew our families long before we were born. He knew the places we would reside. He formed the characters of us while we were still in our mother's wombs. God placed the desire in our hearts and the dreams in our minds long before our paths ever crossed. God is so big. He doesn't balk at the obstacles. He just looked at our hearts and he knew a long time before we did that we were right for each other. He picked us and he placed us together in a friendship that has been the most beautiful journey to walk together. We wanted to share our story so that people will understand how incredibly awesome God is and how deeply He understands who we are and what we need, and that He gives us the desires of our hearts because He cares about us. We always thank God for matching us and giving us the most perfect friendship.
Oh, and I've seen many searching for answers far and wide, but I know we're all searching for answers. Only you provide, 'cause you know just what we need before we say a word. You're a good, good Father. It's who you are. It's who you are. It's who you are. And I'm loved by you. It's who I am. It's who I am. It's who I am. You're a good, good Father. It's who you are. It's who you are. It's who you His love so undeniable, I can hardly speak. Peace so unexplainable, I can hardly think as you call me. Deeper still as you call me. Deeper still as you call me. Deeper still into love. Love, love, you're a good, good Father.
God knows us and our hearts and helps us on our journey. When we seek Him and His righteousness first, with all our heart and all our mind, He meets our needs. Jeremiah 29:12 says, "Then you will call upon me and come to pray to me, and I will listen to you. You will seek me and find me when you search for me with all your heart. I will be found by you, declares the Lord."
It's who you are. It's who